Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm your host Brian Keane, online fitness coach, nutritionist and 3-time best-selling author, here to help you by deconstructing expert guests on all things health, fitness and mindset. Today's guest is with running coach Gary House. Gary is somebody I've known for years and is, as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, the person I send the majority of runners to. Anytime anyone inquires to me about training for a couch to 5K or a marathon without any secondary goal, purely running, Gary is my go-to guy in that. And in today's podcast, we talk through all things running. So this is one for anyone who's interested in getting into running or is already an established runner and looking to improve. We kind of jump back and forth and we talk about how he got into running and how a random half marathon in Leicester led to him meeting his wife, which is an absolutely fantastic story. It's one of my favorite origin stories for how anybody met their partner. We talk about his first race versus his most challenging race, avoiding or managing the dreaded shin splints. This is something that I wanted to cover as a particular topic because I know some of you have searched this alongside the podcast. So I'm going to put it into today's title so that you have this podcast to go back to, some of the things to look at and how to potentially avoid or manage shin splints if they're struggling or bothering you when you're running. We also talk about when and if you should focus on your running technique, strength and gym programs to support running performance, how to recover after runs, so everything from short 5Ks 3 times a week to 100-mile ultramarathon training preps, and the motivation question about why haven't you stopped running yet. So a nice little mindset perspective shift for those of you who are looking to keep your motivation so that you're able to do your 5K, 10K or longer distance runs. So without further ado, here is today's podcast with my friend and somebody that I've been looking to get on the show for quite a while. So I'm glad we finally got to do this episode. Running coach Gary House on how to get into running, avoiding shin splints and how to recover after a run. Enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today with my guest, Gary House. Gary is a running coach, an ultra runner who has spent 10 plus years getting results for other runners. His coaching methodology is always to apply up-to-date science, research and training, but he's also not afraid to try new things and take inspiration from all corners of sport and life. Having been competing himself for 15 years and coaching for over 10 years, he uses both these experiences combined in a unique service that gets results. The House Running Club is a place where you can laugh and learn all along with other runners like you from around the world with high level accountability from his coaching team. I'm looking forward to talking all things running in today's episode. Gary, welcome to the podcast.
Hi mate, thank you. Yeah, good to see you.
Gary, this is one of these things that people that are not on the podcast won't know, but we've known each other for quite a while now, and you're one of my favorite Instagram accounts, and finally you are starting to get some of the recognition with the following that has exploded in recent months, which we'll come back to, I'm sure. But before we get into any of that, I want to hear a little bit about your backstory to tell people what got you into running, because I've been, and you know this already firsthand, but I'll say it online so everyone can hear. You're my go-to person when it comes to preparing for marathons and runnings. I use you and Inner Fight in Dubai for like ultra endurance events, people that are doing marathon to Saab, running to the Arctic, things along those lines. I send out there, and everybody else who falls on that marathon, half marathon, all the way up to kind of 10K, I send to you, either to your content or to your coaching. So again, I think you're doing tremendous work, but I'm curious just for everybody to hear as a grounding foundation for today's podcast, talk to us about what got you into running in the first place.
Yeah, cheers Brian, thanks mate. It was like I've spoke about it before, and it's quite good thinking back to it because I easily forget where you started when I've done something for so long, and that's been the sole focus and the business and all that kind of thing. So it's nice to almost reminisce. It was when I was in high school, I was kind of just playing around with trying to get days off school, to be honest. That was cross country for me. So it was a football and rugby school, but there was cross country, and at that stage it's just genetics, right? And maybe a bit of grit here and there. So I could get a day off from just doing okay at cross country, and so we'd go to county level, or I'd go to travel to like the nationals. Completely like I'm talking top 200 out of 300 maybe at national level, so nothing crazy at all. I wasn't thinking I'm a good runner at all. It was just got a day off here, got a day off school. But football was my thing until I'd say 19, I think I was, and it was team sport twice a week, quite a good level, but looking back I was distinctly average at football, and my friends were really good, so they were getting scouted for Liverpool, Everton, Aston Villa, all these great teams, and they were really good players, and I was just like the left back, and I thought it was because I was a good left back, but it's not. It's like, when you're left back at that age, nobody wants to be left back, do they? It was, and then so Sunday league came along, Saturday league came along, so I'm playing 3 training sessions a week and 2 games a week, but then obviously drinking and going out, and this new set of friends that are older than me came about, and that was pretty much my life when I was 19, 20. Wasn't really going anywhere job-wise, and I'd done college, but that was kind of it. I'd fallen into other jobs, but football and being around the team was what I loved. I took a decision I think I was 21, potentially 22, that I'm going to just move to Manchester because an opportunity came up. And some people that know me know still, but and others don't. So I started out trying to be a hairdresser, essentially. Yeah, quite a prestigious training centre, and I was getting fast-tracked, and in the city of Manchester, that kind of thing, from a small town in North Wales, essentially. So I was enjoying it, but I didn't know anyone in Manchester, didn't have any money, didn't have my set of friends from football. So what I was doing is just looking at the clock as I left the house and started running down the canals. And again, I didn't know this at the time, but it's probably because I was in a house of 6 other professionals, a bit older than me. I didn't know them. Yeah, just couldn't afford the gym and didn't know anyone to play football with. So that was my version of trying to get fit again, really. That's how the running started.
What was the time period, Gary, between that and, say, your first race? And talk to us through, what was your first race? Was it a 10K? Was it a half marathon? Was it a marathon? And what was the timeline between the running down the canals and that first race?
It was quite a long time. It was about a year, and I didn't have any interest in racing at all, really. What was happening was I was run commuting, essentially. So I'd run down the canal, and if I was a little bit late for work, I'd have to run quicker. And if I wanted to get back home from work, I would run quicker, and didn't even have a watch. So I remember getting very aware of my own body as well quite quickly. It'd be like, if I just literally look at the clock, I still remember that clock. As soon as I walked through the front door, take my trainers off, and even then it was 5-a-side trainers, and look at the clock, and it was, oh, I've gone a bit faster today, that kind of thing. What did happen is I went to a friend's birthday party back at home and met this girl. So I met a girl on a night out, and she was in Leicester Uni. I'm living in Manchester. So I entered the Leicester half marathon. This is about a year down the line, I think. And it's the first time I've wanted to do a race. And I've told the story before, but it was essentially because I've entered this half marathon, I'm going to have to stay in Leicester. Yeah. So I probably wouldn't get away with it these days. It sounds a bit creepy, but it was like saying to this girl, I'm going to have to stay down at your house for the weekend to try and impress her. So I'm this half marathon runner. It turned out okay. She wasn't impressed. She wasn't impressed at all because, yeah, I was getting beat by all these old men in short shorts, and I could hardly breathe after about a mile. And I couldn't walk back to the bus, couldn't even drive. We had to get a bus. And did stay the weekend, and then now we're married, happily married, 2 kids. So I can tell that story not coming across as such a creep, I think.
That is definitely one of my favorite relationship origin stories for sure.
Yeah.
With that in mind then, because that all worked out really well, and we are going to bring it back into the running focus, just to give people context of where you kind of came from, and a little bit into your personality as well, I think, Gary, which is what I think is so appealing about you for sure, as someone that knows you personally. With that being your first race, and you've done so many different races between, half marathons, ultras now particularly, and we won't spend too much time on the ultras just because it's a little bit of a niche within a niche for running. But what has been your most challenging race? Just because I think that gives us a nice little anchor and authority based on why people should be listening to you, because you can cover it from all angles, from that couch to 5K all the way up to ultra marathon and everything in between. And we'll unpack things like shin splints, running faster, what runners should do after a run, etc. as we go through. But what's been your most challenging race to date?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it might be a surprising answer. So again, for like a bit of context, I've done stuff like the Dragon's Back twice, which is, they bill that as the world's toughest mountain race across 5 days. And I've done 24-hour races, competed across Europe on the track and that kind of thing. But still, I would come back to the marathon as being the hardest race for me personally, in a different way. So the training that has to go in, the mentality of a marathon runner, and the times and things like that it evolves around, compared to just essentially me messing around in the mountains for 5 days. It's tough, but it's a different tough. To do well in the marathon and have a good marathon race is still, I think, one of the toughest challenges out there. And that's coming from someone who's done, on paper, a lot tougher.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think one of my marathons was considerably harder than the 100-mile ultra that I did, because the 100-mile ultra, it's pacing. Like, you need to condition yourself without sleep for those 24-hour races and 100-mile ultras, but your pacing's quite slow, whereas you can go relatively quick for a marathon if you're trying to hit a PB or hit a personal best, and it's still over an extended distance of 42 kilometers plus. So yeah, I completely agree with you there as somebody that would echo that opinion. With that then, what is some of the mistakes runners make? Now, we're opening up a Pandora's box here, but you had a viral video. You've had lots of viral videos recently, but one of them was about running technique. And I know this is something people struggle with when it comes to running technique. So it might be your answer and it might be something different. But people who want to run, Gary, or are interested in running, the majority of people listening to this podcast either do, 5K runs or 10K runs, and some even more than that. But it's normally within that realm to stay kind of fit, lose weight, body composition, etc. What are some of the major mistakes you tend to see people making when it comes to the run? Is it technique based? Is it nutrition based? Is it training based? Or what do you generally see with your clientele?
It's usually, I think, a timing issue for a lot of people. So whether it's they're not giving themselves enough time to adapt or to reach a goal, that kind of thing. So they're overreaching, or or say, like, time wise, if they are looking to change technique, or they're looking to change fitness or even nutrition, they try and do it overnight maybe, yeah. And this, again, since I ran that half marathon, I obviously got, I wouldn't say addicted, I got a bit obsessed with running, because I was determined not to let those old guys beat me again, kind of thing. And now I'm one of the old guys trying to beat the younger lads. But I was into all the books, I was into all courses, I was going on workshops, and I ended up working with a company, Vivo Barefoot kind of thing, on movement and technique and all that kind of stuff. And although, yes, it did give me a good grounding and understanding of, like, biomechanics and things, and I was trying to change my own running technique, the bottom line was, the more I run and the fitter I got, the more I looked like a runner, and the technique kind of sorted itself out. Yeah, so the more I practiced running, essentially, the better I became at running, which I know sounds quite basic, but this was over a space of a couple of years. So there are some, you'd call them red flags, say, that people are used to knowing, and whether that's overstriking, heel striking, their cadence, their leg turnover, the way they swing their arms, all these things. Again, if you're not getting injured and you're just progressing, then you don't need to essentially change any of that, really. Again, I was quite lucky that social media wasn't a thing when I was researching all this and trying to get help from people. I had to go physically to a coach or to a workshop or learn from a textbook kind of thing and make my own mistakes. Whereas now you can just watch some idiot like me on Instagram telling you what to do, and there's no filter there. Yeah. So, and that goes for me as well. I could tell you anything, but am I an authority on that? I don't know. So, yes, I think time is the main thing to answer your question. It's giving themselves enough time to adapt and just give yourself a break almost, yeah.
That's great advice. When I was running, more so when I was preparing for MDS, the Arctic, etc., I would get questions from people about, what kind of shoes are you wearing? Or, how are you tracking your recovery? All these things that I would say are majoring in minor things. Like, yes, of course, footwear is important and tracking recovery is important, but ultimately you just have to go out and run. and clock in the miles that you need to get and hit the speed that you're trying to hit for the most part. And people can overthink it. And with running technique, I think it can fall into that base. And you've said it beautifully that when you start to run more and you start to look like more of a runner, for the most part, with 80 to 90% of people, it will adjust and course correct and then end up fixing itself. And I think that's a really important message. With that, it brings me on to something that I get asked about very regularly, but I think you probably get asked about it more. And that's shin splints. Like, this is the dreaded S word when it comes to running. Talk to us about shin splints, because I think this alone, because I'm probably going to stick this into the title, because shin splints is one of those pain points that you search that nearly everybody that's ever ran has got. Talk to us about shin splints and what people need to consider when it comes to that particular area.
Yeah, that's why I made a video about it, really, because I get so many questions about it, and it's hard because it would be easy for me to just say, go and see a physio, because that is essentially the bottom line. But then, is it a good physio? Is it a run specific physio? And that's not really helping that person in that moment that's asked me the question, really. And again, so I do always say I'm not a physio, but at the same time, I've been doing this a long time, and I've dealt with people with different sorts of shin splints, and that's almost the biggest cause of issues, I think, because the term shin splints just covers such a wide range of conditions, different discomforts and different pains. Is it anterior? Is it posterior? All this different stuff. How is the shin splint showing? So yes, that's the biggest problem, just the term shin splints. So the first real bit of advice is to really get specific with what is the issue, really. And then you go from, is it a loading issue, which, if you're a physio, you will have one answer. If you're a coach, you'll have a different answer a lot of the time. But the majority of the time is capacity and load, meaning, is the load more than the capacity that your body can hold up, essentially. So whether it's breaking down low down in the shin, whether it's on the outside of the shin, whether it's because during a faster session it's cropping up, almost doesn't matter. You've got to be your own kind of detective a little bit, rewind and say, don't just run through them. Right, where is it showing? What have I changed? Can I get stronger? Do I need to have a conversation with a physio, or is it a coach? And don't just fall into the trap of, self-medicating, icing, resting, or stretching this and all that kind of stuff. Yes, it could be some passive kind of treatments that will help, but you've really got, with shin splints, the biggest kind of predictor of getting shin splints again is the fact that you've had shin splints. So you've really got to kind of go back, and usually it's down to strengthening something, whether it be the calf, the soleus, all that kind of stuff,
With that, it brings me on, and this is going to make less sense to those who aren't following you on Instagram, but I am going to try and give a little bit of context. You did a video, I don't know, was it in the last couple of days? This episode's going out quite soon after we record it, about the massage gun and putting it on way too high. And I laughed when I was preparing and researching for this podcast, just for some certain topics. As I said to you, we did a complete 180. We were going to cover something else, and then we were like, I decided last minute, let's actually do X, Y, and Z instead. But one of my tools for shin splints is a massage gun at maximum speed, at going as hard as I can into my soleus, into my calf, and that's something that's really, really helped me. And again, that's not a prescription, just disclaimer, I'm not a physio, don't play one on the internet, but that's something that works for me. With shin splints, because that's obviously not going to work for everybody, what's one of the biggest mistakes you see with your clients? Is it that they change their footwear thinking that's going to fix the issue? Is it that they go straight to massage gun? Is it that they do too much icing as opposed to looking to root cause? What do you see, Gary, with clients? Because you've worked with so many people over the years now, and I'm sure you've seen this hundreds and probably thousands of times at this point. What is kind of the one or two big red flags that you see people doing that you're like, you're focusing on the wrong area here? It might help, but you're majoring in minor things again.
I guess it always goes back to loading in a certain sense, as in, has someone been running too fast too soon, or too far too soon, or too much volume in their week? And then the treatment, if a massage gun in the soleus helps, then crack on, essentially, as long as you're looking to strengthen that soleus, maybe, as long as you're looking to help your ankle mobility, that kind of thing, because that can be a big issue as well. So yeah, for runners, unfortunately, a lot of the time, the more that they run, the less mobile their ankles become. So that can be an issue. Essentially, it is usually loading that I see. And as a coach, that is partly my responsibility as well. So it's how hard are you going in these sessions? How far are you going in these sessions? Let's have a look back. Can we dial that back? And while we dial that back, can we increase your strength in the gym around that, so that next time when we come back, this doesn't happen again? That's where I start as a coach. A physio may have a different approach. Well, he will have. He'll obviously do a good exam and do some manual therapy and stuff. The soleus is quite a common issue because it's like the powerhouse. It's where the majority of the load is taken, but a lot of the time people aren't aware of it. So they do a lot of work for the calf maybe, but it's, the gastrocs and the surface muscles, they don't get right in there into the soleus. And if someone doesn't know what we're talking about and is running, I'd just Google soleus and then they'll know what we're talking about.
And one physio session going deep with massage, you won't be long forgetting that term soleus, because a massage therapy on a tight soleus is very painful.
yeah and yes, and then all the other stuff like shoes can contribute, and lack of some people do need to stretch more, or they might need to kind of just be more aware with movement, that kind of thing, outside of running. Nutrition, like Shin Splints, depending on how it's kind of showing up. Are you eating enough? So yeah, what you don't want with Shin Splints is it to end up as a stress fracture, which is what can happen further down the line. Yeah, that's like a longer road to recovery then. So that's why it's really important that you do. It's fine if you have massage on it to make it feel better, and like you said, the massage gun and stuff, and that's almost like helping you with the pain, but it's not really going to help you with the root cause, essentially.
Yeah, very well said. I'm curious as well, because you mentioned gym work there, Gary, and I think I'm probably fortunate because I came from the world of sport, playing football, Gaelic football for me, and soccer, and then I was bodybuilding, and then I went into ultra running. So weightlifting, strength training was always the base of my program. And one of the things that I used to get a bit of pushback from other ultra runners, not you, because we read very kind of open dialogue on this, because you're one of the people I would go to for advice, is, strength training and wasting time in the gym when you should be running. And yes, if you're training for a marathon, there's no avoiding running blocks. Like, you need to have that in your training. But gym work can be very complementary to it. I found one thing for me on ultras was because my core was so strong, I never broke form, even on 100-mile ultras or multi-day races for Marathon des Sables or the Arctic, etc., was because I was quite strong from my resistance training and strength training. But that misconception that a lot of strength coaches have, or running coaches have, that you don't need to do gym work, can be quite limiting for people. But I'm curious, Gary, from what you see with people, what's the biggest misconception that comes into you online, either through Instagram, through TikTok, through YouTube, to social media, or from the house running club? What's the biggest misconception that you have to consistently just strike down and say, no, it's not X, it's Y? What comes to mind when I say that?
I guess strength training is a big one at the moment, because over the last few years, more and more people have come to me for advice on strength training, and that's not really how I planned it. It's just, I think some of it comes with age as well, right? When I was 20 and 25, I could run, I could batter myself, my ankle would be hanging off, and I could still do a run the next day. And as you get a little bit older, things start to ache a little bit more, and you kind of look at yourself in the mirror, or I do anyway, and it's not even from a running point of view. I want to be a bit stronger, that kind of thing. And when it comes to strength training, again, everyone wants the 3 best exercises for running up a hill or running down a hill, or if I live in London, how can I train for running up Snowdon, that kind of thing. And it's such a big jump to say, right, what are the 3 best for anything, like and yes, it's partly, it's easy to blame social media, but it's not really, because I was around before social media and it was the same titles in magazines. It was the 3 best exercises to run a marathon kind of thing. Yeah. So nothing's really changed. It's just a headline. And educating first myself on strength training and really getting specific with it was a big change, really, because the assumption is it's just for injury prevention. But I can tell you that the majority of the kind of studies aren't really to do with injury prevention. We know that it's obviously going to help if you're stronger and more resilient, but it's mainly to do with performance, really. That's what we're looking at. So I sell it on performance, which is sometimes an easier sell. It's not like uh, I'm not promising that you won't get injured again. If you train hard, you'll get injured at some point. But wouldn't you want to feel stronger and, like you say, have your core not let you down later in a race? Wouldn't you want to finish a race faster for a change rather than death marching it, that kind of thing? And once you know about strength training and a little bit more about tightening up the reps and the sets and things and time, essentially, all of a sudden you're selling someone on 30 minutes twice, maybe 3 times a week if you're lucky, rather than an hour and a half in the gym, wandering around, not really knowing what they're doing. So just changing their mindset from that point of view, from a time point of view, helps massively, I think.
Yeah, that's great advice, as you mentioned there, in terms of exercise prescription that can help for performance. And it makes a huge difference whether it's injury prevention or actual direct performance, whether you're going, half marathon, I think all the way up to ultra, definitely. And probably that couch to 5K as well. The beauty of that style of training is you can add in secondary and a lot more strength and resistance work because you're not doing as much physical running for lower distance races. You mentioned there about the aches. And again, I know this better than anybody in my mid-30s now as well. What things that you could do in your 20s, you just cannot do in your 30s. Your body just won't respond, or at least mine anyway. Anecdote of one, but it sounds like it's an anecdote of two from you as well, Gary. With running recovery, what are some of the things that any runner should consider looking at for their recovery? Now, take this question in any direction you want and in as many ways as you want, because I know recovery is a very multifaceted term, but talk to us about the importance of running recovery and what runners should be looking at to improve that.
Yeah, it will change on who I'm speaking to a lot of the time. So, like you say, I've got lots of runners that I coach, and I spent lots of time outside coaching the exact people that you're saying, going from 10K to half marathon, maybe to marathon, and they're looking to enjoy their running too. So they enjoy having a coffee and cake and all that kind of stuff. And then I've got the other end of the scale that are competing at quite a high or even elite level at much longer distances. So sometimes recovery is a different kind of conversation with them. Again, I could just sit here with you and say, eat well, sleep well, and all that kind of stuff. And like, people have heard it before. We don't need to tell people that, hopefully, but they are the big wins, essentially. And then I think the other thing is, I'm just a massive kind of fan of reducing time or not wasting people's time. So again, recovery wise, if you're running 3 times a week for 30, 45 minutes, you don't even have to think about it, if I'm honest. Yeah, because you're not really recovering from much. The recovery is like at the acute level. It's like when you walk through the door, what do you feel like doing? Do you feel like having a lie down on the sofa, or do you feel like stretching and doing a bit of yoga? You can almost just pick and choose what you want at that level. Once you push on with your training, it will become a little bit more important because the sessions are harder. You're stretching the body a little bit more. You're adding in hill sprints and stuff that are like a neuromuscular stress. So it's, yes, you do need some downtime, really. And that's, again, you progress the conversation almost. Sometimes it is just, you have to be, from my point of view, it's like really important, like, who am I speaking to? Because if it's just someone that enjoys running 3 times a week with a park run, your recovery can be going to the cafe and having cake with your friends and just chilling out and having that social aspect. That's absolutely fine. You don't have to rush home, have a protein shake, and jump into an ice bath just because you've had a park run with your friends. And again, I'm not kind of doing the others a disservice, because if you're at the higher end of the level and you want to train hard and recover hard, you've got to kind of add in those bits, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The context of recovery is key. Gary, with your own individual, and again, you're on that upper echelon of the spectrum, what is a very underutilized tool that you use or like for recovery personally?
I've never really troubled with sleep, not since I've trained hard. Yeah, so some people, but again, I have conversations with people that do, and we know that sleep and eating enough is the main kind of components. But as I get older, I also think that it's just relaxing, and I don't mean relaxing by spending time on my phone or anything like that. Yes, maybe if it's Netflix, but if I'm horizontal, then I'm kind of happy, that kind of thing. Yeah, because yeah, like at periods of the year and depending on what I'm training for, training can be quite hard and you can be really exhausted afterwards. So just having the downtime, and yes, it might be a luxury if I can have 30 minutes in the afternoon. I know not everyone can do that, but everyone can be on their phone 30 minutes less. And whether it's looking at meditation, whether it's just Pilates or yoga, somewhere where you can put your phone in a box for 30, 45 minutes a few times a week will make a massive difference. And that's not just for me talking, that's what I've helped people with. And so that's the feedback that I get. Yeah.
Gary, what's something that you know now that you wish you knew when you started running first? Pandora's box, I'm aware, but I'll let you navigate that as you see fit.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, obviously, when I started running down the canal, I didn't know it was going to be essentially my career for the next 16 years plus. Yeah, so that's a good thing. If it might have scared me into not carrying on, but from a running point of view, I always come back to just remembering why you started, and it can sound cheesy at times, but a lot of podcasts and things I listen to is, they're doing similar to what we're doing today, setting context and stuff and going through the journey of how we started. But sometimes I'll have a conversation with someone and I'll ask them, why haven't you stopped running yet? And make them think about that. Yeah. So it's like, okay, Brian, why haven't you stopped running? And they'll be stumped a little bit. And that makes them think about, oh, actually, and that'll take a conversation one or two ways. Sometimes I'm asking it because maybe they've got an unhealthy relationship with running. Maybe I'm trying to figure out if they actually enjoy running at all. Yeah, and they've been doing it 5 years. Or maybe it's because I want them to really think back to that starting point, like me on the canal, and I can remember it really vividly. Maybe they've lost that starting point and why they started in the first place. Yeah. So I use that question quite a lot with people. It's why haven't you stopped running? Not why did you start?
That's a great. I really like that. I wrote that one down here too, Gary. And again, I recently stopped running because I ran into a car and dislocated my kneecap. But I was running up until that point. With that kind of gives me a very a follow on that I was going to come back to later. But you've kind of given me that unintentional segue and the power of questions with why haven't you stopped running? Because I think anybody that's into it now, or why haven't you stopped doing anything, is a good question. Why haven't you stopped binge eating? Why haven't you stopped scrolling social media at random times? Like, it's a good way to phrase it. But what are your thoughts on motivation then? Because something that comes back, and I think I'm probably more privy to this than most because I'm very vocal about my dislike of running, particularly when I was training for ultras, because we fall. I remember when you came over, we did our business builder years ago and you flew over from the UK. And I was training for, I think it was the Arctic at the time. I can't remember, maybe the 100-mile ultramarathon in Vegas. I'm not sure. But I was very vocal on social and to you that I dislike running. And you're like, well, I love running. Like, it's my thing and I love it. And people would generally ask me, well, how do you get motivated to run? And I had my reasons. I was trying to build up mental resiliency. I was trying to condition myself to do things that I didn't feel like doing so that I would be able to show up in ways that I had to show up regardless of how I felt. But what are your thoughts on motivation when it comes to running? And again, I know it's a bit of a loaded question, but definitely people will either say to you, how do you stay motivated, Gary? Or how can I stay motivated to run? What's your general response to that?
The initial response would be the same as you, probably, that don't rely on it. Yeah. And kind of start there. You can't rely on motivation every single day, the same thing with willpower, both the same to me. A lot of it comes down to personalities and things like that. When I was, again, like late teens, early 20s, I didn't have motivation. I didn't have motivation to do a lot else other than spend time messing around with my mates at the weekend. Whereas other people in my life were very motivated to have a career and stuff like that. So running kicked off my motivation, I guess. So I speak like almost like it's a privilege that I found running, because that motivated me. That became the anchor. Everything else in my life kind of got better after that. So I don't have the same struggles as some people do, and I'm aware of that. So for me, getting out the door, yes, there's obviously times where I can't be bothered or I don't want to go for that run, but it's never really been under question. The same as for some people, just getting up and going to work isn't kind of an option sometimes. Yeah. I think it's okay to as well for your and to check in with yourself, and your motivations will change. Like my motivations at 39, I'm 40 this year, and running is my business, is different to when 15 years ago. Yeah, so I was motivated on times, and then I was motivated on impressing a girl and all that kind of stuff, and getting fitter. Now I have different motivations. I want to spend time with certain friends that I've got in the running community. Maybe I want to visit a certain place. I want to experience something. But yeah, and ultimately it's my business. So now I see myself as almost like a business owner that runs a bit, yeah. Whereas before I was a runner that kind of had a side business essentially. So your motivations will change, and that's okay too. So keep checking in with yourself, whether it's every 90 days, whether it's every 6 months. And again, like, lockdowns were almost a great reminder of that, because lots of people's races got deferred for a year, 2 years. I had people that had doing races 3 years later, and I could tell that their heart was no longer in it, and they were big races. And so you have to have a conversation. It's like, you were a different person those 2 or 3 years ago, and so are we heading in the right direction here, or is it just time to kind of change courses? And that's okay too. Some people, especially in the running world, are almost scared not to change course. Yeah, I have to keep going longer. I have to go from 10K to half marathon to marathon to 50K to 100K to whatever it is these days. Yeah, because there's so much out there. Whereas sometimes it's maybe you just want to get faster at half marathons, or you want to experience more half marathons, and that's totally fine too. So just really, that's my best advice. Check in with yourself. What is your motivations at that point compared to your lifestyle at that point? And then that should help. Yeah.
That's great advice, Gary. And that speaks directly to me. In 2020, I did my first 100 miler, probably my last 100 miler. I'm not sure, but my first anyway. And I was preparing for the Everest Trail race that November. And then obviously the world shut down. And by the time that race was up and running, which was last November, I kind of falling out of love with that ultra endurance. And also I did exactly as you said, the mistake there. And I want to pull this out because I think there's genius in that simplicity of checking in with yourself. I was training for the 100-mile ultramarathon, planning to go to 200 miles because I'm like, okay, well, I did a 100-miler. The next obvious progression is 200 miles, when actually the next obvious progression might be to improve your marathon time or your half marathon time, because that fits better in with your schedule and business and relationships and parenthood and all of that. And it's so easy to kind of follow I won't even say the path of least resistance, because it's the path of least resistance in terms of the way to think about progression, but that may not be what you need to do. And I think that check-in is really important. So I just wanted to pull that out because I think that speaks directly to me. And hopefully, again, not everyone has a similar kind of goal set to what I had, but in terms of, is what you're doing now serving you? Are you the same person as you were 2 years ago when you had your marathon goal or your 10K goal? And if you don't, that's fine. Just check in with it.
A lot of it is that external versus internal. So when you're, and again, this is through helping people a lot. And when you go from 10K to half marathon to marathon, and then you do venture, lots of people venture into ultra now. If you walk into the office on a Monday morning, you've ran 50 miles, nobody ever asks you what time it is you did it in. They're just impressed by the fact that you did 50 miles. These days, unfortunately, the marathon is kind of, you walk in on a Monday morning, it might be your first ever marathon, and they want to know what time you did it in. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it is the path of least resistance to go further and further, because you're walking more. You're just turning it into a long picnic, essentially, rather than having to train harder and harder for the marathon. Yeah.
That's so true. And it comes back to what we mentioned earlier, when I found one of my marathons considerably harder than the 100 miler because of the pacing. It's all about the pacing and the intensity that you're doing it at. And these longer races, although seem very impressive, and by all means they are, it's not to diminish what you've done, what I've done, what others have done, but it's a different type of race. It's a different type of approach. With that then, Gary, because something that when we work in different areas, as you know, I send the majority of my runners to you. If they come to me and somebody messages and says, I'm training for a 10K or a half marathon or a marathon, I don't cater to that. I cater to fat loss, building muscle, sporting performance for athletes in glycotic sports, GA, soccer, rugby, etc. That's my area. And one of the things that I have to set with people is a goal, because I don't think you can hit a body composition goal without knowing, well, this is where I want to go. With running, and you're the expert in this, so I'm curious to pick your brain on it. How important is it for people to have a goal, whether they're at the beginning of the spectrum, less so at the upper end, because when you're training for, a 100-mile or a 200-mile race, you have a very clear goal, a very specific date you're working towards. How important is it for people to set these mini goals along the way to potentially hitting a 10K or a half marathon or even a full? What's been your experience with the runners you've been working with in terms of the importance? Is it high? Is it low? What have you found?
Yeah, I think my answer's probably changed over the years. It is important to have a goal, especially the people that usually end up in running. They are goal orientated a lot of the time, yeah, and I can tell that from some people. But a lot of the time, that goal might not be time and distance or something. It might be a feeling. It might be a confidence thing. It might be, like kind of, a lot of people that have been raising a family for God knows how long, and then they're looking for something for themselves. So again, like from a coaching point of view, I've just learned that not everyone is going to push on for times, and they don't need those goals in their training. I've got quite a few people, increased again since lockdowns and things. I've got lots of people now that train with me that never race, which I never thought would happen. They don't race at all. I might set them a challenge, so I might give them random challenges like a 60-minute time trial, or for the mountain runners, how much elevation can they get in 4 hours, something daft like that. Something that they would never have tried in a race necessarily, just for motivation purposes and things, linking back to what we said. But a lot of the time, more and more is what I see now is goals are more like feeling or confidence or experience, that kind of thing. So in a good way, I think it's been good learning that from a coaching point of view, because again, like the coaching that I first learned is almost not redundant, but you learn these principles and methods, and it's almost got nothing to do with a lot, because running, especially trail running, has seen such a massive rise. There's a big disconnect there. A lot of people are coming into running now because, like I say, if I can increase their confidence through running, or they can feel good about themselves, that is a goal in itself. But you have to either be very self-aware or learn that self-awareness for that, or have a good coach.
Do you think with that, Gary, that more people, and I know you've said it and not to rehash what you've already said, but one of the things that I found in my early fitness career, now this could be my bias as a personal trainer when I qualified first 11 years ago, similar to you in terms of timeline, was people that were running were normally trying to lose weight or get in shape, and then running was the kind of vehicle for that. Have you seen that evolution over recent years? Now, obviously, there's going to be a bias based on the people you work with, but that people are looking for more than that now. They're looking for that confidence within themselves. They're looking for that just focus to shift their attention to whatever anxieties they have, and their running is their vehicle to do that. Have you seen that shift in more recent years?
I think so, and that's a little bit of a shift in fitness in general, maybe, because again, when I started out work-wise, I was in gyms, private gyms, then bigger gyms, and then took my business outdoors. But when I was outdoors, it was typical weight loss clients that wanted to run or thought that they needed to run. So it was that weight loss population, 30 to 40, a couple of kids, that kind of thing, but coming to me for running, essentially coaching, and they were almost shocked that we were doing hardly any running. So it was more, it was game based and this kind of thing, but it was just giving them a break after work and then educating them around that a little bit. If you're a personal trainer, that hour didn't matter as much as the time spent outside of seeing them. So it was like the group that I had, like we had 3 groups running at once, and it was, you could see the confidence increasing in these people. And at the time I was not even 30, but I was coaching people in early 30s and 40s. But because it was a fun environment and it turned into a tight community, all their confidence went up, and you could see it. They'd come in with a frown on their face and they would leave happy. So that was almost like my job done. And then what you would happen is, because you were educating them outside of that, the weight loss would happen, kind of thing. Yeah, they would be more empowered to learn about calories and things like this. And then I think as as social media is pushed on, and we all know, I don't know anyone that doesn't really know about calories in and out these days. To a certain extent, that's almost not the issue. It's how do you get to that point, I think, a lot of the time. So yes, it has, a lot of it has changed. Obviously there is the old set running community that is all times performance, and that's great too. I love working with those people, but again, now it's just opened the door to a lot more people essentially to get outside, and the weight loss can be part of running rather than think I have to run kind of thing to lose weight, because I'll be the first person to say, do you want to enjoy running? Because if not, you can try 100 different things outside of without running to lose weight. Yeah, it's not the best way.
Yeah. And I think what you mentioned there too, something I've been kind of trying to put out into the social media sphere, is that focusing on that process, that like exercise can be the motivating factor that allows you to look at your nutrition, which is something I've shifted my mindset recently, that if you run or you go to the gym or you work out and you feel better, you're more inclined to be mindful of, well, what food choices am I eating? You know, I don't want to undo, is the language people use. I don't want to undo the good that I've done. And that can be a very motivating effect on people in a positive shift or a positive habit change. I just have a couple more questions, Gary, and I'm curious because we fall on different ends of the love spectrum for running. I would be quite low down on the love spectrum. Love hate. I like having ran. You know, it's the same as writing books. I don't like writing. I love having written. I don't like running. I love having ran. What do you love about running?
Again, it changed. At first, I loved the fact that I could see the progress really almost quite quickly, and I'd gone from a team environment to it all being on me, and it was almost, and again, looking back only on reflection, it was the fact that I wasn't part of a team of great footballers just along for the ride. I was making progress and getting better race results, and then managed, I'm starting to win the odd race here and there, and that was, I'll be honest, at first that was the motivation, because that was the first time I'd essentially been good at anything, or that good at anything, and I could see that I could get better still. So back then that was the motivation, and that was what I loved about it. And now it's more like, again, that comes with age. It's more the people I meet. I know some weird and wonderful people through running and that kind of thing, and the fact that if I go running now, the kids want to come with me. It's mainly because I'll take them to the cafe afterwards, and after 5 minutes they're just asking to go to the cafe, but I get that time that they want to come running with me a lot. That's all they know me as now, which again, outside of running, I'm not one of these people I'm massively obsessed outside of running. I think that's come because it is my career, my business. I don't speak about it outside of that, but yeah, I love it so much now, because I can listen to two random strangers talk about running and enjoy it. I can, on a podcast, I can hopefully educate people, because that's now a skill that I have just from experience. So that, I love that part of it. And I love the fact that when I go to my friends, I've got a good group of tight mates from when I was 15, 16, and they couldn't give two, they couldn't care less that I'm a runner, really. Yeah. It's grown a little bit more over the past few years, because they've accepted that I am a runner, but yeah, nobody cares that I'm a runner when I go and see them. So I've got that outlet too. Yeah. So it is good. That's why I love running, really. It does change over the years. So if you're falling out of love with running, my advice is you will have dips, and it'll probably come back if you loved it once. Yeah.
I'm also just going to say, for people who don't know Gary personally or aren't following you on social media, we've gone through this whole podcast, 47 minutes without either of us swearing, which is ridiculous when you think of the content that both of us create on different channels. So because there's running in this title, there's probably people listening to this with their kids in the car, etc. So we'll keep this one swear free. So good job, Gary.
45 minutes in.
It's different when we've opened with 3 minutes in and we've dropped the F-bomb. It's like, okay, that set the tone for the rest of the podcast, so we're good. Yeah. Gary, before I get on to the last question, the website, houserunningclub.com, I'm going to link it in the show notes, and the quick links. You've got everything there, from the free plans to the coaching. But for people that want to follow you online, you're very active on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Instagram particularly is exploding at the minute. Where's the best place for people to reach out and follow you before I get on to the last question?
Yeah, I think Instagram's easier just because of the platform. That's where I get lots of questions. I do lots of Q&As. I try and answer as many questions as I can. It's my Instagram, even before it kind of went a bit wild before Christmas, it's always been very interactive with the people I follow, and I love that part of it. Even if it's me taking 10 minutes out of my coaching on the laptop to answer questions or act a bit daft, then that's the place where you will probably find me. And if I can't answer you, I'll direct you to my email, and that's the best way. Yeah.
Amazing. I'll link those in the show notes on briankeenfitness.com and in the description for today's podcast. Definitely go check out your Instagram page. As I said, finally getting the recognition that I think it deserves, because there's so much value on there, but also Gary, which we've got a little bit on today's podcast, but you'll see it very heavily on social media. His comedic timing is second to none, in my opinion, when particularly within the running.
One video just as fast as they came, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Gary, final question I want to ask you before we wrap up. And this is, you might have to take a minute to think about it, because it's kind of a question that you could go in a million different directions potentially with. But as an authority within running, and personally, as I said, somebody I send people to all the time, if you could offer one piece of advice, think social media, think onto Instagram or TikTok, one piece of advice that you could give every single person on that platform who's a runner, what's the one thing that every runner should know? If you were to put it down into one nugget, this is what every runner should know, what would you say?
I think it's the timing again. Like, I learned this from one of my business kind of mentors, and it was, you'll have heard it, so I don't know who came up with it, but it's people overestimate what they can do in the short term and then underestimate what they can do in the long term. And there's not as much long term kind of plans these days. Yeah, it's all everything instant. I want to fix my broken knee instantly. I want to run my 5K in under 15 minutes in 3 weeks, all that kind of stuff. So just give yourself some time and back yourself longer term.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think I heard it definitely with Tony Robbins, that people underestimate what they can do in a year, or overestimate what they can do in a year, underestimate what they can do in 10 years. I think when you take that philosophy to fitness, to running, to body composition, to business, it's so applicable. Gary, mate, I'm so glad we got to finally do this podcast. As I said, we may have a round 2 down the line, because I was originally going to have this as an episode for how to train and eat for your first couch to 5K, 10K, half and full marathon. So anyone that's interested in that episode, drop me a DM or let me know, and we'll definitely do a round 2 covering that topic, because up until 5 minutes before we pressed record, that's what Gary was probably prepared for. So I appreciate being able to do a complete 180 on that, mate. But thank you so much again.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Thank you.
There you have it, running coach Gary House on how to get into running, avoiding shin splints, and how to recover after a run. Again, wide-ranging conversation. I would like, and I'm planning at some point hopefully to do a second podcast with Gary, as I mentioned, so definitely let me know. We were originally going to talk about how to eat and train for your first couch to 5K, 10K, half and full marathon. So we may cover that in a separate podcast. Let me know. Hit me up on Instagram DM or tag this show or episode on your story, and let me know on that post if it's something that you'd like us to cover in a part 2. That's everything from today's podcast. As always, if you enjoyed today's show and you were a fan, please leave a rating and a review. I always appreciate those massively. That's everything from me from today's podcast. Catch you all next Monday.